we are branded as criminals. I'm leaving the Army less than 6 months after a combined 17 years career because of the injustice of GRAP.
I was a law enforcement agent in South Carolina. I did nothing wrong. I was never arrested, never charged, and I lost my job anyway.
I mean, there's times where I broke down on my knees and like, what's happening? My career ruined, about to lose my pension. How am I going to support my family at age?
The real tragic outcome from this GRAP debacle is the soldiers and former soldiers who stood up and volunteered to serve and protect our Constitution are now being treated as criminals without any kind of due process rights. And it's horrific what Army CID has done. At the height of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the Army National Guard came up with a plan to increase recruitment by enabling off-duty National Guard personnel to go out and talk to their friends, co-workers, and encourage them to join the Guard.
GRAP did a fantastic job. They were short people, and it created thousands of temporary recruiters. I participated in GRAP while I was in ROTC at the University of South Carolina working on my commission. The program was very simple. You had to engage people that weren't in the military, talk to them about the Guard, and you would input their information into a system online. And if they ended up joining, you would end up getting paid 1/2 of your payment. And if they completed basic training, or I believe shipped to basic training, you would get paid another $1,000 for a total of $2,000 per recruit. I put 3 people through the program, and so $6,000.
Yeah, I legally recruited 6 soldiers and was paid $11,000 from 2005 to 2007.
And the program, by all accounts, worked fantastic. They discontinued the program in 2012. There had been some real corruption or criminal misconduct, very limited when you consider the size and the scope of the program, but there were some recruiters that were manipulating data and giving kickbacks or sharing money with recruiting assistants. Army leadership testified at Congress and testified to wildly inaccurate numbers of people who had participated in the program who they labeled criminals.
I never knew it was under investigation. I just returned from a reconnaissance combat patrol in Kabul, Afghanistan in 2018. The CAD agent said I needed to do a DNA swab and get fingerprints so they could close my inquiry into my participation in GRAP over a decade ago.
The investigations were incredibly sloppy, so they would call people on the phone and say, who was the first person you talked to about joining the National Guard? And keep in mind, this would have been, in many cases, 8 or 10 years before. If they didn't say the recruiting assistant's name, the investigators assumed the recruiting assistant was guilty of criminal misconduct, which is absolutely ridiculous.
Around 2014, I got a call from a place. I'm not sure what the number was, or they didn't really identify themselves. They asked quite a few questions regarding Captain DeLeon, and I mentioned to them about him recruiting me to get into the Guard, and it just was random.
And they chose what procedures and guidelines to ensure crime was found versus investigate one.
Most district attorneys would not touch these cases because they were so tainted with cookie cutter interrogations, phone interviews, and poor documentation.
And this is one of the most tragic parts of this entire debacle. Army CID has this system where they can title you. And what that means in simplified terms is they're entering your name in the title block of a criminal report, and it also would show the offenses you're alleged to have violated. Whether you're convicted or ever officially charged, they titled thousands of people involved in GRAP, and then they took the extra step of reporting those names to the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Criminal History Data Center. And so all these people who were simply titled based on a CID agent's opinion now have a criminal history that is wrong and illegal because they've said that these soldiers or former soldiers were actually arrested or received into custody. And of course, they were never arrested.
One of the worst parts of this is that I had no idea. I had no idea that this had occurred. And I found out about years later when applying for a concealed weapons permit in South Carolina that I had what looks to be a pending charge.
The impacts of being titled by Army CID are pretty substantial. If you're still in the military service, at a minimum, you will absolutely have difficulty getting promoted.
So I found out in 2019 I was selected for promotion to major. My promotion packet got flagged for fraud investigation. So once you get notified that there's a red flag in your promotion review board, you have 10 days to submit a rebuttal. And then you have 18 months before they make a decision at the Senate. All kinds of bureaucratic hoops, administrative hoops through the Army. I mean, we even have Congress members petitioned on my behalf. And by the time 18 months hit, for me, it was April 1st, it expired. So now I'm forced to remove from the list because they didn't follow the timeline. Now you can't continue to climb the ladder.
We've seen many, many cases where somebody has moved on from the Army, but GRAP comes back to haunt them through this background investigation. So I have clients that have gone on to be physician assistants or physical therapists where they have to get a state medical license, or a real estate agent where they have to get a realtor license. I've represented police officers. All of these professions require a background check. To the layperson looking at a NCIC report, it looks like the case is still open and it's still pending, but in reality, there never was a case. And so these former soldiers that are now trying to get on with a different career are still having to deal with the horrors of GRAP many, many years later.
The police department that I was working for when I found out that I was titled, they did work with me. You know, they heard about my situation and they looked through, you know, the paperwork that they could. And in their eyes, when it came down to my credentialing, there was nothing they could do. They could no longer employ me because they had to have a credentialed law enforcement officer with a clean record. My wife was extremely supportive, and that's all I could have asked for. This was an extremely stressful situation for our entire family. This had me down for a long time mentally. I knew that I had to get out of bed and continue to be a good father and put food on the table and take care of my family.
It's very sad. It's very sad. And I'll stop myself as a lifer on active duty, retired 20 years, just like my father did. But it's a tough pill to swallow. And right now I look fine, but man, every night I can't stop thinking about GRAP. I can't stop thinking about the others who's going through the same thing.
I've seen nothing in the decade or so where I've been working on GRAP cases to make me think they are going to overturn their long-held decisions. If you go back and look at these cases using the same flawed assumptions, you're going to get the same flawed conclusions. And Army CID is absolutely not the people who should be looking at these cases. They deserve an independent third-party review by what I would call real professional law enforcement.
I do not have a whole lot of hope for CID reviewing their own cases. It feels a lot like a fox in the hen house. It has a lot of irony to it. Those of us who choose to serve in the military, put on the uniform, and believe in our rights as Americans, this situation is showing that those of us in the military are not being afforded the rights that we're fighting for.
Why does it seem like accountability stops at the Pentagon? There's cowardice in our leadership, period. Simple, point blank. There's cowardice. Not one leader is elected to fight for the innocent soldiers.
I wish I hadn't have helped them out. I still love my country. I still love South Carolina Army National Guard. But this isn't worth it, and the way it turned out and the way we were treated and are still treated is terrible.